Shooting is more nuanced than it first appears. In this video, I share the 3 things that will change the way that you think about the shooting phase. Hello and welcome to Incursion Events. Today I will be mostly talking about the shooting phase. As it's often where battles are won and lost, understanding which way you point the shooter is quite important. So let's get started. First of all, learn unit capabilities. I'm not just saying memorize all your data sheets. Whilst that's obviously a very useful thing to do, what I'm getting at here is forming an idea of how likely a unit is to kill other units at range. Understand our weapons' capabilities. If you'll pardon the pun, it's literally our ammunition for success. The most obvious way to level up our knowledge on this is Google. Have a little search about probability and apply this to 40k and dice rolling if it's not something you're already familiar with. There's plenty of non-40k and a few 40k resources out there that you can find just with a simple Google search, calculating probability, 40k, dice, that sort of thing. I'm not going to go any further into how it all works. I'm by no means an expert on it, and I'm also aware that with a dice game, no matter how much we might expect a given outcome, sometimes the dice do just say no. What I am saying with this tip though is that a bit of familiarity around probability, how we apply it to dice rolls, will help us to view situations in the game a bit more pragmatically, especially as things change and the game unfolds around us. Take for example, a completely made up unit with 4 ballistic skill 3 melter guns shooting at a transport. At first glance it feels like that vehicle's going to be toast, facing down all that anti-tank firepower. A quick rough calculation of the odds, we need 3s to hit, so with 4 dice, it's quite likely one will miss. Then with the high toughness of the tank, if it's higher than the strength of the melter gun, actually all of a sudden only one of those 3 hits is going to be likely, probability wise, to wound. So suddenly the destruction of that tank doesn't feel so assured. Now, I'm not saying we need to be a mathematical genius, and I have oversimplified the calculations there. It's just a rudimentary grasp of probability to quickly look at a situation and think, oh, I've got 4 melter guns, 4 anti-tank guns pointing at that tank. Oh, that tank's going to die. It could die, but actually when we take a step back and think about the probability in that situation, it gives us a different perspective, one that is incredibly helpful in understanding the capabilities and likely damage outputs of our units. Where this really takes off is coupling this knowledge with practice, multiple games with the same units, and learning how they perform into a variety of different targets helps us to gauge their effectiveness in various spots, ultimately leading to purposeful decisions in the shooting phase that lets us get the most out of our units. And the final part of this is understanding how the enemy can negate our damage output. I mentioned the value of clear communication in my last video, and it's just as important here. Asking our opponents what defensive abilities or stratagems that they've got access to is a really good habit to get into. If our opponent can improve their armor save, for example, or give themselves a feel no pain save, that will drastically change how things could play out. Having this information up front before we commit to moving and shooting our units is crucial. Understanding what our units are capable of and dice probability transforms our decision making on the battlefield. It's not just about rolling the dice and hoping for the best, it's about wielding the power of a calculated chance to your advantage. Risk assessment turned into a bit of an art form. With probability in mind, you can assess the risk of relying on a particular weapon versus bringing more guns to bear. Good level of understanding of what our units are capable of, probability, defensive options. We can assess how many guns we need to have at our disposal to get rid of a given target. The more practice and knowledge we have, the more we can make informed plans that give us an edge on the battlefield. Now, let's talk target selection. Before we even begin the game, we need to be thinking about what in our opponent's army is going to threaten us the most. High value targets like heavy weapons, tanks, monsters, they're all the obvious choices. Then we need to think about how your opponent is likely to use these key units. They're going to have a game plan, and target priority is a good tool to try and stop this. If we can disrupt their strategy, we can force them to adapt and make tough decisions. Target priority also has a context in the mission objectives as well. Say our opponent has a big nasty tank or a monster, but limited scoring units. Maybe it's a smarter play to shoot the chaff units, the smaller units, prevent our opponent from scoring and sacrifice something to the big heavy instead of trying to actually kill it. instead of focusing on that big bad scary unit, suddenly we're exploiting a weakness. This is particularly useful in scenarios where we've got limited ability to deal with such a unit, so we don't have much anti-tank, or it's just later in the game, we've lost some key units. If we're going to struggle to actually kill it, picking off the other units is potentially going to make a bigger difference in the game. We don't want to focus fire on something we're unlikely to kill, have our shooting effectively do nothing, versus killing a couple of units here and there which might negate scoring, impact the game in another way. I'm going to focus on killing what I can actually kill, and that's very relevant if you're looking at the probabilities, target priority, and you're thinking, I'm not going to be able to take out this unit, let's go for stuff that I can actually kill. There are going to be times when we will need to shoot the big tough units barreling down the board, and times where you've got to focus on other things. Taking a moment to think about what objectives are at stake, what the following turn or two might look like if you do X or Y, will help to shape that decision. Every unit you eliminate denies your opponent resources and options, whether it's points, board control, key abilities. Each casualty weakens their position, so target priority is our means of controlling the narrative and dictating the terms of engagement. Adaptability is a hallmark of effective target priority. The battlefield will evolve, and so should our plans and focus. Maybe a new threat emerges, or something we thought was less threatening suddenly becomes more relevant, vice versa. So we've got to be ready to adapt this, constantly evolve how things are shifting throughout the game, and switch up our target priority as the game dictates. Lastly, shooting in the right order. It's really easy to dive into the dice rolling, getting into the pew pew. It's fun, right? It gives us a cheeky little dopamine hit when we see our units blasting away and the plan coming together. It's great. Got a transport over there full of infantry. We've got to blast it off an objective. Everything's going well. We fire Unit A, but unexpectedly, it blasts the tank to pieces. Our dice perform better than we'd hoped. Fantastic. But now the infantry get out, but a bit further back from the rest of our guns, and we've now got nothing left in range to shoot them with. Awkward moments like this can be avoided. We just take a moment to think about the order in which we shoot. I mean, this applies even in the movement phase as well, like where you're going to move your units and set up firing lanes, set up what can shoot at what. If you've got units that can shoot at multiple things, put 2 tanks to kill one big nasty threat, and the first tank does it, what's the second tank going to be able to shoot at? The other thing to be mindful of is what your opponent's army can do. We've mentioned stratagems that can negate damage. A very popular unit in Eldar is the Incarn. If we're shooting something and killing it, the Incarn can then teleport to where you've just shot and killed a unit. So being careful in that particular matchup about what you kill when, so that the Incarn is deterred from moving at a certain point. If you've got lots of other guns that have yet to shoot, it's not going to want to teleport over and get close to those guns. It's going to want to wait and then move there afterwards. That is specific to Eldar, but there are also armies that can shoot back at you after you've shot them. So thinking about what units you're shooting into them to make sure that that stratagem is less effective back into you, that is something really important to consider before you start shooting at those units. Ultimately, the order in which we shoot is all about maximising efficiency. So perhaps you've got units that will confer a bonus if they've got a successful hit. A lot of transport units confer rerolls if they shoot something that the unit disembarking the transport then wants to shoot at. So you've got to make sure you're firing the transport first in order to get that bonus. And avoiding that awkward moment with your opponent and saying, look, I should have shot this unit first to give myself a bonus. Do you mind if I just quickly say we've done that? Most people can be reasonable in these situations and you can find a way to resolve it, but really the best way of dealing with that is just to not get ourselves into that situation to begin with and just taking that moment just to think about the order in which we need to shoot. And there we have it. So, to recap, learn unit capabilities. Hand in hand with this is probability and understanding the defensive tactics that your opponent's going to use to disrupt your plans. All of those things combined help us to assess what we need to be able to shoot to effectively deal with any given target. Target priority, understanding what our opponents are bringing to the battlefield, what's going to threaten our game plan, how that works in the context of the missions, what we need to kill in order to score and deny our opponent's scoring, what weapons we might need to prioritise to stop our opponent being able to do significant damage to us. If our opponent's got a couple of anti-tank units and we've got a lot of tanks, we would want to consider prioritising removing their anti-tank quickly before it can start to efficiently remove our tanks. Then adapting this as the game unfolds. And shooting in the right order. Make sure any buffs that we've got are working in the way that we intend, that we're not getting too over-enthusiastic and removing units, denying other chunks of our army targets as a result, being aware of any tricks or traps our opponents might have before we pull the trigger. And there we have it. Hopefully this has provided you with something that you can use in your games of 40k to level up your shooting. If you found this helpful, please like the video and subscribe to keep up to date with all my future videos. The next one is going to be all about the assault phase, close combat, melee, getting up close and personal. And the ones before this were all about the movement and deployment phase if you haven't seen those yet. And if you're thinking about getting involved in Warhammer tournaments, check out the video description below to find out more about events in the south of England that I'm hosting. Until next time, keep rolling those dice, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.